when you think about international markets, particularly with the distance involved, it is looking like, looking for the wood between the trees. Hence the little picture on that I have on the presentation here. And so what you really need to do is a bit like going into a dark room and start looking for the light switch. And the only way you're going to do that is by picking up knowledge. So, the presentation that we've just had from Yogita is really invaluable in trying to get as much information on markets as possible, on categories and what's going on, to just identify, where you should be looking and where you should be fishing. And if I can move my slide to the next one. So, where is my market and who is my customer? And really what you want to be looking for is, what is the medium to long-term potential of a market? And where does it fit into your international strategy and also your market classification? And what I'd sort of talk about that is, quite often there are markets out there that you can trade with quite nicely. You don't have to do an awful lot. So they could be markets like Iceland, Malta, where you don't even have to change packaging. But then there are bigger strategic markets that, and invariably these are markets like France, Germany, US, Australia, where there's a bit more involved in developing those markets, and it'll take a little bit more of your time. And so, you have to have a strategy and you have to have some focus. And the key thing is also, when you're looking at new markets, is actually, can you create a sustainable business there? And the way you'll find that out is by undertaking market research. So data that you've just, that you can obtain from various sources, be it Mintel and looking at market reports, but also category reports can do that. But what you need to be delving into is, can you offer like novelty or uniqueness to a category? Can you compete? Is your pricing, are you able to support your business going into that market? And then you need to have a sort of an understanding of, what is the size of the prize there, in terms of volume, and actually, can you do it profitably? What do you need to do with your product and your packaging to change it? Hopefully it's just packaging, but sometimes you need to conform with the market. You need to maybe do things with your product. And then you also need to estimate what the entry costs are going to be in that market and what the ongoing investment is. And then there's all the other bits of, when we can travel again, what are the travel costs going to be, hotel costs, eating out. And these were all parts of the equation of working overseas. And then also internally, the support that you need, be it logistics, be it sales, be it QA, be it marketing, they all have costs that you need to look into as well. So, you need to have a little look. And as I said, how to find the markets, the customers and partners, there are sources of information out there. And so in order for you to be able to make an informed choice, you need to research it thoroughly. And the Welsh government do provide really, really good support. So, the fact that there's an Insight conference here now is part of that. But you can also do get bespoke research done under what's called an ITD. You can also find partners through ITOs. There's also meet the buyer events that happen. There's Taste Wales, but then also, if quite often people operate in different categories, or they're a little bit more developed in terms of a market, and they actually want to do much more bespoke development of markets, and that's where the OBDV comes in. That it comes into it. But also, there's a lot of information you can get from doing searches on the internet. You can look at your competitor brands, and just to find out what they're up to and where they're operating. And quite often it also includes, who their distributors are and where they're sold. And also their marketing approach. So you can use that to fine tune what you do. attend meet the buyer events. You know, it's becoming much easier now to get in front of buyers and have good meetings. So Taste Wales, you know, there are plenty of buyers that go along there, but DIT now, you know, I've just in the last few weeks I've attended a Gulf food event where you're able to meet the buyers virtually, which takes out a lot of the travel lag that you get. So, you know, use the networks that you have, and then, you know, use those virtual physical trade visits when you can. You know, use trade associations. So the Export Club is also, you know, a good avenue to use. This forum is also good. But also, you know, one other thing is to keep files of information as well, because you're going to be you know, picking up lots of information, but actually quite often that information it will go in and it will register for a period of time, but you might need to refresh it. So keep files of everything, even if it's just pictures to remind you of things. But, you know, key thing is, if you're having meetings, prepare for them, crunch some numbers, you know, try and get a perspective on the market, you know, and, you know, really reflect before you take decisions, because quite often you get you know, approached by someone on the internet, think, oh, that could be interesting. They've come from Qatar. Maybe I should start doing business then. But there's a bit more to it than that. And so this is what I'm trying to, if I can get my screen to move down to the next slide. You know, what you really want to be trying to look for is, you know, where do you sell today in the home market? And what proportion of your business is where? So are you selling into retail? Are you selling into gourmet department stores? Is it a convenience on the go? Is it out of home with hotels and food service, HoReCa? Or is it online into business to see? Or is it duty free? Now, you kind of, that then gives you an idea, okay, if I'm going overseas, where do I want to target? And you know, I would use that as a, you know, what you're doing in your home market should steer you in terms of, okay, these are the types of places where I want to be able to sell my products. And then you'll have a view in terms of, okay, I sell 60% of my business of my UK businesses into premium retail. Well, that gives you a pretty good steer as to that they're the types of avenues that you need to try and target when you're going into an overseas market. And then in terms of, you know, what products and formats do I sell in the home market? Okay, can you then take those and do they work in that foreign market that you're looking for? And then it's also, okay, well, who are the key targets in those markets that you want to get to? So get some understanding of who are the main players in those markets. So you can pick that up through IGD reports, and you can also get that through Mintel. You can also look online, but also through your network. Like, how do you want to sell to them is a key question. And then you need to then drill down a little bit further. Okay, what am I going to offer these people that's unique that they're not getting today? And also have a real think about why you think you can compete, because that's actually, you know, also vitally important. And you know, in terms of your route to market options, you know, the other thought process, you know, okay, there's going to be a potential in a marketplace which hopefully would deliver some cash, and hopefully also some profit. But then you also need to think about, you know, what is your pricing going to be, what's your investment going to be, but also critically, what is your involvement and your company involvement going to be? You know, if it's a smaller opportunity, you don't need to dedicate so much time to it. But if it's one of the bigger opportunities, be it US, Canada, Germany, France, obviously you need to dedicate a bit more time to it. So you need to think about how you're going to do that. But in terms of your route to market, you could go, you know, it's becoming increasingly easier to be able to sell direct to retailers than it was many years ago. And, you know, these meet the buyer events, you're getting to talk to retailers direct. So quite often you can minimize the middlemen, be it importers, consolidators, and sell direct. But in order to do that, you need to be selling some volume. So it could be that actually that importer route is the way there. The other trend that's happening, and we've seen a lot more through COVID, is selling direct to consumer. And that's basically through either your own website or through retailers that sell direct to consumer in markets, and that's becoming that's boomed 200–300% in most markets. So it's working out what is the best option, because all of these different routes have an impact in terms of your pricing. So if you have an importer or a consolidator, they're all going to take either a markup or a margin. And then there's also the other factors of, okay, now with Brexit, there's a lot more admin involved. There's going to be some more documentation. What's that going to cost? What does the shipping cost take? What are the import tariffs? So these are all elements that you need to think of. And really what you want to be able to do is to get to a price that works in the most economic way for your business. Hello. Okay, my screen is stuck again. So in terms of market pricing considerations, you need to think about what is that end customer price going to be, and that will depend on your own cost of goods, the supply chain that you put in place, and then also what the partner expectations are in terms of their margins, be it a retailer or be it a distributor or an agent. But really, when you need to be able to work that out. And there is at the bottom here, where you probably can't read it too much, is a value chain. So that's building everything up in terms of the transport, the import costs, distributor margins, like local VAT. And that will give you an idea of actually where will my pricing end up after exchange rates have been factored in. And what you need to try and look at is, okay, well, where's my pricing going to sit? Is my pricing going to be competitive in that marketplace? Because that will then determine what kind of volume you can sell. So if you're right at the top here at $8.99, you're not going to sell quite as much as if you do at $2.79. Where are you going to fit in this equation? And then you kind of think, actually, well, if I'm higher, what am I giving the category that it doesn't have already? Because you can then, if you can justify your price premium, then that's good. But you need to be able to work that out. And then in terms of your pricing, if you've got margin in there, don't be too greedy. You want to make it economic, and you also don't want any partners that are involved to be too greedy in terms of their value expectations. But also don't start too low either, because you don't want to always be down in this category, because that's where you'll get squeezed first. And it's also, if you start too low, if there are some inflationary pressures in terms of cost of goods, it's also then much harder to put the pricing up. If you have fluctuations in currency, that will have an impact on your price as well. Even if you may sell in UK pound sterling, any retailer or importer, they will be affected by any exchange rate movements, both good and bad. So it's worth keeping an eye on that. But also allow yourself in your margin or your value chain, a percentage to be able to invest into your business, be it that 5% or 10%, but have or 15%, to have that allowance in there in order that you can move a market forward. And then in terms of, what are your customer and partner considerations? You need to have a little look at, okay, if it's a distributor or retailer, what brands are they selling? Do you recognize them? If you don't recognize them, do some research on them. Have an idea, look at their packaging, look at their marketing claims that they make, and get an idea of how do your products fit within the range of, be it a portfolio of a distributor, or within the range that a retailer is listing. Where's your pricing going to fit? And the other key consideration when it comes to particularly distributors, and to a degree with retailers as well, what focus are they going to give your brand? Because if there's going to be very little focus, that's actually not very helpful for you. You want a partner that's actually going to really buy into your business and your brand saying, actually, I've got a vision for this that I can, we've got a joint vision of where we want to take this, and we buy into it, and we're in this into the long term. If people just want to sell a few boxes, actually, that's maybe not where you want to be, and have a good look at, where is their current portfolio sold, if it is an agent or a distributor, because that'll give you a good steer. Is actually, are they giving me a load of blarney that they can get into Carrefour? Or actually, yes, actually, I can see their products on shelf. I can see it online. It's there. Okay, they're believable. And also ask them questions around, what do they know about the marketplace? What do they know about key competitors that you might have? What is their understanding? Do they buy insight into the market? And the other part of that's really important is, do they genuinely like your brand and consume it? Because if they're, a real advocate, that actually helps you a lot already, because you can feel that they'll go and present with passion. The other bit is to really understand is, do you have a rapport with these people? Have you got a nice relationship? Because that always helps. It's not the be all and end all, because sometimes I've worked with people and they have been the most awkward buggers in the world, but actually they're really effective. So that's also a part of the consideration. And I think a big thing, particularly when you're going into new markets, is how quickly do people respond? If it takes them weeks, I think you've got a question mark there as to whether they're the right people. If they come back within days or within hours, I think that's showing you that there's an interest. And really what you're looking for is, like, from these people is, their contacts in the market and how they're gonna work on your behalf. Are they going to be a good ambassador for you? And are they going to help you when things also get tough? Because business is not easy. You will pick up bruises, and I'm sure you all have, but that's also part and parcel of working internationally as well. You want partners that are going to be working with you to help you sort out issues. And so the key thing to do is develop some screening questions that you really want answered, either when you're visiting or when you're talking to people, because the key thing is, like, your motivation here is to get sales growth and profit. When it comes to distributors now, many distributors, they want the same. They want sales growth and profit, but also what they offer their customers is their ability to, like, manage a category on their behalf and lead a category. So where they're category captains, they want to continue to do that. It could be also they want to expand into new categories. That's part of they want to expand their business and go somewhere else. And that's actually where their motivation is for working with you. But what they also want to do, and we've seen this through COVID on everybody, is spread the risk. If all your eggs were in food service, you no doubt had quite a difficult stages during the course of last year. So working internationally helps spread your risk, but also that's the same for partners that you work with. They don't want to be reliant on just one particular supplier. And look, when you're developing your screening questions, there's a load here. How long have they been established? What is their structure? What is their key account? So it's really important to try and get a real feel for them, and actually to get an understanding. Okay, if we've got a good rapport, actually, what is this business that we're going to generate together going to look like? So, have we got are they open book on terms of pricing? Have we got a business launch plan together that we can structure this business around? And you also, when you're meeting people, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's actually physically, you'll get an impression of people, of their office. They'll even show you pictures of warehouses and all that sort of thing. So you'll get a good feel for what they're all about. And this is key, is when with all customers, it's all about developing relationships. So really from early on, it's all about you sharing your vision and your objectives and what makes you unique, and also for them to be able to buy into that. But as the journey goes on, actually, once you've appointed them, is you want to maintain regular contacts, right? You need to think about, okay, how often am I going to have contact with them? Is it weekly? You know, remind them of what the vision is and what you've agreed together. You know, check the orders, check stock. You know, check whether new lines are going into target customers on time. You know, do you ever, you know, review the pricing, because pricing won't stay the same. You know, the other thing is to bear in mind is you might be making money, but they're not. So how are you going to get over that? Because it's pretty pointless someone working with you and not making any money. So you need to sort of be prepared to look in to those areas and, you know, understand what it's like from their perspective and what the issues are. You know, share insight that either they've generated or you've generated, so you're keeping up to date on what's going on in the market. But also be really honest and clear on what boundaries there are as well. You know, if someone's saying, look, I need you to drop your price by 20%, and actually I've committed us to a listing fee of this, but you didn't know anything about this, you know, then you know, I would say someone's overstepped the mark there, or should have addressed issues earlier. So there's things to, you know, to be clear on setting the scene with partners, but also, you know, if people are doing well, recognize it, and you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give them a, you know, a 5% override or a 10% overrider. You know, it can just be simple things like taking them out for lunch, or taking them out for dinner, or celebrating a birthday, or recognizing their effort through an award that you give. But you can consider things like overriders. You could even put into the mix of extra marketing investment if they've done well. Key thing I think people do like is they like to come and see you. You know, invite them to the factory. You know, get them to give you input as well in terms of new product development ideas. Sometimes you can generate new ideas in markets that is, you know, that you hadn't thought of before. So it's good to have them in there. And, you know, key thing is have interest in what they're doing. You know, sometimes you get really quirky ideas, but actually it works in their market. So show interest in it, and actually don't poo-poo everything that might come your way just because you don't do it that way in the UK. You know, markets and cultures are all different. And listen and consider requests constructively. You know, it's kind of vitally important to do that. So, I mean, hopefully, you know, this is kind of giving you a little bit more thought around actually going into new markets. It's not just a load of trees and I can't see anything, but it's, you know, what you're doing is you're picking up knowledge, getting an understanding in order that you can build relationships with people to, you know, realize what you're trying to do in a new market. So that kind of is a quick overview of my slides. There's a lot of detail in there, and as Bryson has said, that these slides are available for you to read at your leisure. But I'll now move on to a little bit of a chat with Dan from Nine Brand, who has got lots of experience in international as well.
Very much looking forward to this, Jeremy, I have to say.
So Dan, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your experience so far at Nine Brand.
So as Bryson mentioned, I've been in international now for about 16 years, which is pretty much all of my career. My first role was at a company called Bell Engineering, who make cement mixers and that kind of thing, so in construction products. That was as a French-speaking after-sales and warranty contact, which was quite an intense role as what was basically my first real job in sales support. Following from that, I joined the family-owned export company called Linton Exports, where I stayed for 14 years. And that again was managing French and Spanish speaking accounts, primarily focused on servicing expats and tourist areas. Whilst I was there, my role became developed quite a lot in terms of I started getting more involved in the systems and processes, and I developed a bespoke ERP system alongside a programmer, which was really interesting and really beneficial for me professionally and for the business as well. And then I moved to Holbeek 9 brand in July of 2019 as their international sales manager, under Bill Smithcoats, who I know some of you will have dealt with previously. Bill's the commercial director of Holbeek, and we have crossed paths a number of different times. Socially, Bill lives not too far away from here in leafy Sandbach. It's not that leafy. And professionally, Bill worked for DCS, and I dealt with them for a long time, and in various different golf days where we've crossed paths also. It felt very much like the right time and challenge for me at that point, and I joined them with the intention of providing better focus and support for our international customers, which was a growing aspect of the business. Much like many companies, export was treated somewhat as an add-on to the UK retail business that is high maintenance. But when the majority of your sales is coming from these customers, then obviously they need to be cared for. Export represents about 60% of our sales, primarily through our proudly Welsh flapjack brand Bryn Mawr. Its importance is absolutely critical to us, really.
Great stuff. And where did 9 brand sell in the early years, and what did the company learn?
So the brand itself was developed by Holbeek in response to requests from the Baltic states, Sweden, Denmark, and Northern European markets, really. In terms of what we learned, it's quite difficult to pin down, really. I think one of the advantages, one of the main benefits was being first to market. And so one of the key learnings would be that maintaining your market position is quite a lot easier than gaining it. But that means that maintaining it is extremely important, because there's a lot of people trying to come for your business. In markets where we are not strong, you see that it's quite difficult to gain listings unless you're bringing something really special to the market. So a lot of the points you made in your presentation, Jeremy, about understanding your position, understanding your USPs, and then building on from that, choosing who your partner in that market would be is really, really key. So we have these, as you mentioned, these what are now virtual trade development visits, international trade outreach programs with the Welsh government, with yourselves, which are brilliant at getting, sometimes in a single visit over the course of a couple of weeks, you might speak to 6 or 7 different retail distribution partners, and there's a fine balance about picking whether you want somebody who's going to really, really focus on your brand and you have that relationship with, whether you want somebody who is huge and can get into all the areas, but you might get lost in their portfolio. I think that the learning there was, well, for me, the most valuable asset of a distributor is that relationship and that trust. And if you've got a partner who will there's distributors that we work with where I will sit in the meetings with their retail buyers, and we have quite open book relationships in terms of margin structures and gate fees for promotional activity. And so the ones where we have that relationship, we invariably get the best results. That's not to say if you just leave your distributor to it, they can't do a good job, but I think the key learning for me from the early years was about getting that relationship right and becoming a partner rather than just a supplier.
And we've I know Bryson kind of buys into this, but we all have made mistakes in terms of developing internationally, and in terms of ones that you're willing to share, that is. You know, what are those mistakes, and you know, what are the key learnings that you took from that?
Well, I mean, you know, nothing was ever my fault. No, of course. I think I remember one specific occasion when I was quite young, and I think this resonates with some of the things that you were saying in your presentation, Jeremy. That we supplied a mixed container of different FMCG goods into the UAE, and again, so the relationship had been built. I had no real concerns about the guys, you know, decency, should I say, and you know, the things were ordered, and he told me that he'd ordered them before from different places. But when the goods arrived at the customs in Dubai, really revealed that one of the mustards had got, I think it was quinoline yellow, which is a banned food colouring in the UAE. So it had all been arranged by a letter of credit, and subsequently the mustard was compounded and destroyed. Thankfully, though, the customer did pay for the balance of the goods, so it was just it was a bit misleading. He was just a bit misleading in trying to get a product in that he thought he could probably get past customs. I think it was a Coleman's mustard, but I think the key learning from that is, for me, was firstly, it's better to have a problem in the UK than overseas. That's the first one. You know, being better safe than sorry. And then understanding your responsibilities is really important. And I think I think this is really key at the moment, actually, with the whole EU-UK trade and cooperation agreement that Jurgita mentioned, and you know, we all at the moment, a lot of exporters are in Wales will be looking at their products, processing the rules of origin, checks, labelling adjustments, and all that kind of thing. And there'll be a number of businesses here who are going through these checks and finding that they're going to have to pay tariffs on export to the EU, which they weren't expecting to. And in the same way, that there are people who are exporting goods and aren't aware that they will be liable for duties. I think for me, it's about, I'd rather know where we stand, where you should stand, and make any strategic and commercial decisions based around a solid understanding of implications and risks. And that goes into the kind of cost lining that you had there with your Excel sheet that was extracted, which demonstrates, you know, as long as you know where you stand, you can make commercial decisions around risk. So knowing where you stand is important in cost and in regulations.
And selling overseas, obviously, if you're selling, if Nine Brand is selling 60% of the business overseas, you know, it's a significant proportion of the business. But you know, how do you think the business has benefited over and above the turnover side of it?
So, I mean, I think not having all your eggs in one basket, it was a phrase that you nearly used in your presentation, and I think it echoes here. I think mitigation of risk. So having, you know, when we say, I know this is primarily linked to the financial side of things, but if you've got a wider portfolio of customers, then obviously in different markets, when you have crises in different markets, then it's a global crisis that affects different markets differently. You're less at risk to the effects of those. So in Judith's presentation, Sweden was one of our largest customers is Sweden. It was really interesting to see the trend there, and obviously Sweden handled the pandemic in a very different way to the rest of the EU, which focused more on economic policy rather than safeguarding, so to speak. And subsequently, economically, they have, for us specifically, performed very well. But on a wider basis, I think we as a manufacturer are really interested in trends. So being constantly traveling around the EU and USA and Canada, I haven't been out to Australia yet, but it's definitely on my list. But seeing these markets and the different trends in each market gives you a real good understanding of what your product could offer in those markets. And then so that's from a branded point of view. And then one of my kind of key aims coming into the business was about trying to engage directly with retailers. So you had a model there that demonstrated the different routes to market. We want to have a diverse portfolio of customers, and in some markets it absolutely makes sense for us to deal directly with retailers. And in understanding their markets through these virtual trade development visits, through the presentations that we receive from you guys, and then through being actually present in those markets, it's like going to a trade fair every week. And you can pick up a lot of information that will help you to shape your product and you know, make any changes necessary to make sure that you've got the best chance of success. So I think it's a greater awareness of trends in market that will help us and, you know, and everybody really understand whether or not they could be successful in those areas.
Okay, great, that's great, Dan. Now, in terms of the future, and I know from some of the conversations that we've had is Brexit and the administration that's now involved with Brexit is obviously, you're still digesting and working your way through that. But where do you see the greatest opportunities for 9 Brands? You know, once you get settled with all these Brexit issues.
This might come as a bit of a shock in terms of what you've just mentioned there, but I still think for us that that our nearest neighbours, despite the potential cost impacts, so in Europe, are going to be the best opportunity for growth. I mean, we've had some data commissioned that suggests that the healthy snacking category in Europe is still relatively underdeveloped. But as again we've seen in the presentations, very much the focus of people's attention. So developing that category is one of our key aims. I think as a business, we are keen to explore markets further afield, and we've done some great TDVs, most recently with Australasia, Middle East, Canada, and which have all been really, really good, and we have had some good successes in. But I think, as you really clearly pointed out in your presentation, understanding where you are strong is a key component of strategy creation, and we see opportunities to develop various different EU markets and really push the healthy snacking category forward, and service these retailers directly with like private label goods, which we hope then will translate into better treatment or favourable treatment of our branded offerings as well. So yeah, I do still think that it's closer to home where the opportunity lies immediately, but that's not to say that as things develop, further afield, I think this process is going to give some fear to a lot of businesses, but also some confidence in the opportunities that are presented through for wider markets. So I think immediately I would say the European Union, and then as things progress, certainly obviously the larger growing middle classes in the likes of China, India are really going to offer opportunities for growth as well.
Great stuff. Okay, that's great. That was really, really useful, Dan, and I'll now hand you back to Bryson